Hello, bonjour, hola, malang. Welcome to Awesome Africa, and hello to Jen. We're still waiting for Andries to come in. I'm Kathy Berman, and I'm just welcoming the world to our amazing Africa and to the southern tip of South Africa, where we've got an unbelievably exciting lineup. How's that for a bit of self-promotion? Excuse me. But as is the issue in a developing world, our preceding broadcast and now ours is dogged by the issue of Wi-Fi. Developing world, or is it just South Africa? I know that in the broadcast preceding that one, they spoke about our inalienable right to Wi-Fi. I just want to put a quick background into Campus Party. It's 22 years old, started in Brazil, first time ever in South Africa, first time ever online, 30 countries participating. And there are technical issues because Global's managing those many broadcasts, but boy, is the South African team doing awesome stuff. Right, enough about behind the scenes. Jen, very, very welcome, very big welcome to you. And thank you so, so much for joining us. I'm going to pretty much hand over to you because you know your subject inside out. Suffice to say that I really like the idea of the talk, which is from public art to public toilets, because both are as important in a developing and developed environment. Jen, I can go into your CV. Suffice to say, you've got a master's, you're highly acclaimed, you're involved, you've come originally from Melbourne, you have various accreditations and affiliations with Columbia University. But the most exciting thing is that you've dedicated your life and your work to us in South Africa and to some of the marginal communities of South Africa. So to kick us off, Jen, what is a fabulous woman from Australia digging in the excrement in Diepsloot?
Okay, repairing toilets. Yes, my common name in Diepsloot is the toilet lady. That's the lady that fixes toilets. But I would just like to reiterate your comment about the Wi-Fi. I think my colleague Andries Makhatshwa is trying to join and we're having challenges, but we had the same challenges in Diepsloot a few weeks back when trying to do a training webinar. So it is an inequality that we face all the time when we're trying to do projects and trying to connect people at this sort of time. So I'm sure this is something you've heard on this webinar quite a lot, but it is a real shame and it is a real problem and a challenge we need to address, that places like Diepsloot have inadequate signal, yet places like Parktown have pretty good signal. So something we do need to address. And I'm certainly not as fabulous as you make me out to be. I'm only as fabulous as all the people I work with and collaborate with. It is their skills and their energy that make the projects go so well. And going so well, you know, we have some successes and we have a lot of failures, like anything in public space. So I don't know if you want me to just jump into a presentation and show some cool images and some cool projects that we've been working on. Would that be the best way to kick off?
I would love it because your images are so inspiring and your words are even more so. And people can carry on looking at us boring people, or they can look at your real work. So Let's jump in. I know that Jade's managing from behind the scenes, so let's go for it.
Cool.
I think you're screen sharing.
There we go.
There we go. So this is the joy of being in home broadcast studios where we just cannot, where our poor technical team is so far away from us.
Okay, can you see it?
Jade's bringing it up now, and here we go to a black screen, but I'm sure it'll come in shortly. Maybe while we're waiting for it to come live, would you like to tell us a little bit about Sticky Situations, how you got to the name, and how, I think Jade's trying to get us live, how you got to the name, and you know what you do. I know you're probably going to go into that.
Okay, so Sticky Situations we have a really fabulous collaborative team, and we spend time working in challenging circumstances and challenging environments. So the places which we find ourselves most working at the moment and where there's a dire need is between the intersection between formality and informality. We live in cities that are governed by Western rules and title deeds and ownership and bylaws and rules and police, yet it's also an African city, in Johannesburg. We have an enormous what's called the informal sector. And I don't really like that word informal. As a team, we try not not to use it, because there's nothing informal about the informal sector. It's a very well organised and coordinated part of the city, from the reclaimers to the street traders. So we find ourselves working a lot in that very challenging space about how to meet in between formality and informality.
I see that Jade's asking you to reshare your screen, which is going to absorb a bit of your thinking around that. And we've got you looking at your screen.
Very intently.
Which is just the joy of the technology. Hopefully,
okay.
There we go, and it's live.
Up.
We are up. Fantastic.
Okay. Okay, so yes, so the space between formality and informality, and something that we find a lot in public space is a lot of people sleeping out in public spaces, and residents sleeping in houses not far away, and a lot of conflict between those two. So this is an image from Vredendorp, just on the western side of Johannesburg, where people have been living for quite some time. And there's families that live here, and children and women. So I guess it comes down to a question about who owns public space. Whilst public space is owned by, theoretically by national, provincial or local government, who actually owns it? Who interacts in it? Who governs and polices the rules? We do need some sort of law and order in our cities, but in reality, does the law and order always fit what we require for a city to function and for economies to function? So a lot of what we do is based on something called action research. We listen really carefully, and we listen to what we can't hear as well. We have to hear the silences to make sure we hear all voices. We join the dots between ideas and people, and then we facilitate action. So
before you go on,
yes.
Fascinating for me that you chose Vredendorp as the starting point, because that surely is one of the big blights from the apartheid era, where people were brutally uplifted and their homes no longer exist. And this is ultimately, although we've had many years of democracy, this is the outcome of what was an enchanting space in the pre-bad apartheid times.
Yes, you're right, and there's been forced removals over and over again. It seems there's transitional housing projects that have been neglected. There are land claims that have been outstanding for many decades now. Families are moving on, so it's a very challenging space to live. And we're not without sympathy for the government departments trying to handle these challenges. But there is also a point where things just need to be resolved, and it's very hard for people to move on with their lives when these are outstanding issues for decades at a time, and families are still sleeping on the street or are still existing in spaces where there's conflict. So moving
on, I'm going to introduce Andries. I'm so sorry, Jenn.
Yay, he's here.
He's here, and I'm worried we're getting a bit of feedback, but let's keep going. Andries, if you can keep your mute on in between sessions. Guys, we've now got two sticky, amazing people on the feed, and they're the two people who make the face of this city, Johannesburg and Greater Gauteng, so much more palatable and so much more inhabitable. They work with the community to change the physical structures and the physical experiences of the city. So welcome, Andries, and Jenn, back to you.
Cool. Hello, Andries. I'm glad we could make this work.
Thank you.
Cool. So this is a project we started many years ago, 2014, in partnership with Johannesburg City Parks and Zoo and the Johannesburg Development Agency in GIZ. And it was in N Street, North Park in New Doornfontein. So we're heading from Vredendorp to the other side of the city. 6 years ago, and yes, that's how long we are committed and remain engaged with communities. There was a question about what city parks wanted to develop the sites. So the question was, what do people want? What do we want to see? What needs to be built in this space that's going to complement community in a space where there are homeless challenges and drug challenges and safety? So the first thing we always do, we have to ask about neighborhood challenges and neighborhood assets that can be built upon. we do a lot of relevant stuff while we're talking. So we do, and it doesn't have to be expensive. It doesn't have to cost a lot of money to have, a few hula hoops and some chalk, and to do storytelling sessions in the park, and to have ongoing conversations with families and mothers and fathers in the area, to try and understand what really are the challenges in these areas and what can be built upon, because that's the most important thing. There is not one neighborhood we have ever come across that doesn't have something positive happening, or someone doing some good that can't be built upon in some way. Because by bringing new projects into spaces, you're creating something that's unsustainable. Whereas if we're bringing resources, and resources could be finance, it could be equipment, it could be knowledge or networks, we need to contribute to existing programs and build them up. So, and we can't do these sort of things without partnerships. We have to facilitate ongoing partnerships. And of course, to the left is the famous or infamous George Cossey's boxing gym in Hillbrow. If you haven't been there, you have to go. Running boxing classes and tournaments and aerobics in the park.
In the park.
Absolutely.
Fantastic.
Absolutely.
Right.
And then, of course, there's a bit of training. Always spending time working with other people, other municipalities. This particular training is in eThekwini. On the top right is Joburg, actually. Always trying to share our skills with as many people as possible, and new ideas and new ways of thinking about how we manage our public spaces. Because sometimes it's not just about security. Sometimes it's about activating parks with families and women. Women and children make parks safe, in my personal opinion.
May I interrupt at this point? Oi, what an image. So I know you're running a narrative, but perhaps, Andries, you can tell us a little bit about how you engage with communities, how you find the people. And Jenn, I'm assuming that the projects are commissioned projects, and that you're working with somebody who has an idea of what they want with an agency, and these projects you are then entrusted to make it work. Is that how it works? And then maybe we can get to Andries, and unless you're planning to bring this in much later, and I'm sure you are.
No, it's fine. We're sort of winging it here, seeing whatever is interesting to you. I'll kick off with a question about whether we're commissioned or not, and then perhaps hand over to Andries in relation to the engagement processes. Sometimes, for example, N Street North Park, we are commissioned to do a participatory study. The commission lasts for 6 months. 18 months later, we're still asking questions and facilitating. UN Habitat comes along and there's a little bit of funding to do another project, and then City Parks comes along again, and we try and experiment with a park activation program, park activation coordinator program, where people from communities or around the parks are paid to manage and activate parks. Then there's no funding for a while, and then something else comes along, and we need to do mosaics and murals in the toilets. So projects will run sometimes, like the Diepsloot project, for 10, 12, 13, 15 years, and sort of all these other small things that come along add acupuncture. Is like an acupuncture, and it's not always about us being paid. Yes, being paid is great and it's important, but sometimes we cross-subsidize from one project to another to keep the other projects going, and always, always, always making sure that our colleagues on the ground are getting paid. That is one of our really big criteria.
Very important. And Jenn, I just want to dwell on that a little bit, because prior to this discussion, we've been talking about careers for the new century. And it would be really interesting to find out from both of you again, but let's start with you and then we'll go back to the community question and to Andries. How did you get involved with this, and how did you build up a reputation so that you keep getting more and more commissions in? Because this is tough work.
Andries?
Okay, sorry, Andries, let's go with Andries. How did you get into this, and tell us about your path in here, and then how you're working with the community?
I live in the inner city of Johannesburg. I've been living in the inner city as a resident of the inner city since I moved here in the year 2010. So I've been living in the inner city for the past 10 years now. It's 11, going to 11 years. So I got interested in sort of like this work through sort of like school and the fact that I'm a resident of the inner city. So being, one of the people that are concerned with what's happening within the public realm and the spaces that I interact in as well. I'm also an athlete, so having to play sport, having to participate, having to be in the outdoors you know, I value so much the outdoor or public spaces. I feel like they play such a huge role in the community. So I guess that's sort of like how I got into like this sort of like business or this type of work that we do at Sticky Situations.
And okay, so you are part of the community. So do you naturally go to people you know, or how do you find the right, obviously they've got to be people around that space, but how do you find the right community?
Well,
politics amongst people. Jenn, maybe go on mute in between if you don't mind. Sorry,
yeah,
Andries.
So I guess we try to use whatever is appropriate for whichever space or neighborhood that we work in. We also, you know, come with the understanding that every sort of like neighborhood or every space, it has its own particular, so it's different. While, you know, it might have similar traits to other spaces, it also has something that is distinctive about it. So based on the project that we're trying to do, or based on, you know, the type of stakeholders that we're trying to engage, we try and find the appropriate method in between to try and get to the people that we need to engage with. For an example, you know, we may spend some time, you know, into, let's say we're in the public space, like public space upgrade, might spend a lot of time and see, you know, who gets to use the space, you know, in terms of like different times, morning, afternoon, what types of activities are they using the space for, you know, that type of stuff. Or we can even look into like, you know, the surrounding in terms of like land use, you know, who's around, you know, in terms of like stakeholder identification. So as I'm saying, like there's quite a huge sort of like range in which we sort of like do stakeholder identification.
Thank you. Jenn, I interrupted your presentation and we're about to enter quite an image. So let's keep going.
So then sometimes other things come up. So just because we're commissioned to work in the park and to help develop a design for the park, doesn't mean what happens if people can't access the park safely. So if people can't cross the road, now the park is owned by Johannesburg City Parks and Zoo, but the road is owned by Joburg Roads Agency. And in this particular park, there were an enormous amount of pedestrian accidents. It was getting to the point where once a week somebody was hit. And eventually it was mostly the women that drove this, decided to protest because they had done everything right. They had approached the government office. They had approached the politicians. They had done petitions. They had done a sit-in at the office. And eventually they said, enough, our children cannot die on this road anymore. And so they blocked the road. And it resulted in action. For many years, they said, no, we can't build speed humps on this road. Now, there hasn't been any accidents. 2 or 3 speed humps were built on Nugget Street near Doornfontein. There has not been a single pedestrian accident in the years since they were built.
Wow.
And it's important. It's important to remember that just because our job is this little square of park, it doesn't mean that we can't assist or facilitate or put people in touch with the right people for all the things around the park, because public space does not operate independently. It operates with all the other networks and the other people and the buildings, and the projects only happen with George Kossi and Yvonne and all the people that do amazing work in that neighborhood. So things do not operate in isolation, and that's a really big part of what Sticky does.
Perfect.
Shall we move on to toilets?
Oh, yes.
Yes, right. Thank you to Mark Lewis for this fabulous image of toilets. So communal toilets are also in public space in many areas. These toilets in Diepsloot were not repaired for over 20 years, and it was the Global Studio program that brought students from about, I think in the end it was about 60 universities from around the world, that started to focus on toilets and what the challenges are that residents face. The average amount of people sharing a toilet is 39 households. Now that is only based on the registered quantity of shacks in Diepsloot Extension 1. That does not include the shacks in between the registered shacks.
Wow. So that's about 400 people for one toilet.
Around about, that's if there is a toilet. That's if there is a toilet. So now a toilet that isn't repaired for 20 years with 40 families, of course it's going to break down. And if one more person says to us, well, you know, people need to stop breaking toilets, it is not people breaking toilets. It is just the sheer quantity of people using them. So of course there comes training, which is really important in part of these things. There's our little webinar in Diepsloot on the bottom right where we struggled with the access, with data access. It is about local knowledge and local knowledge sharing. That is one thing that Sticky really, really spends a lot of time on. All knowledges are equal. Every piece of knowledge brought to the table is of equal importance to the rest. And resources are equal too. So a place, Extension 1 in Diepsloot, may not have money to fix toilets, but they have the knowledge to help us make sure the toilets are cared for and repaired properly in a way that it needs to be repaired. And an international partner has the money to pay for it. So all knowledges and all resources are equal at all times. And by the way, that's 1,000 litres of water, that many beer crates. We have local partners, and we think up things all the time, like the Broken Tap Award, to thank our local partners, which in this case is the South African Plumbing Institute and Plumlink.
The Broken Tap Award, beautiful.
Yeah, this is awesome. I'd like to thank Tanya Hugo-Sack for this fabulous piece of art. Any other artists who would like to make Broken Tap Awards, we'd love to do a series. We have international partners where our colleagues from the plumbing industry in India came to assist. Obviously, I'll let you guess where the two right-hand partners come from, which countries they are from. And of course, we employ and promote as many local businesses.
I'm sorry, I had to get my head right close to see it, but I couldn't have identified it, Jen.
What, the kangaroo and the Dutch flag, yes, the orange, the Kingdom of Orange. And then, of course, the artists are always not far from our projects, always. And employment is always part of our project as well. And this is one of my favorite pieces of public art on the left-hand side, was a series of the human rights, the Bill of Rights painted on Human Rights Day on a series of toilets in Diepsloot.
So were you involved in that, or did people just spontaneously decide to do that one?
I was somewhere on the outskirts of that one. That was some fabulous local artists called Lucky and Carly from Black Bite Productions who produced that piece of art. That series.
Thank you.
And of course, there's the gathering of the data that has to be impenetrable. It has to be well gathered. It has to be done, analyzed by neutral parties. And the data over 4 years showed us that 1 billion litres of water is lost per year in just one extension of Diepsloot through lack of maintenance of top structures. That does not include the water under the ground. That is just the water that leaks out of the pipes above the ground. This cost the City of Johannesburg 20 million rand per year. But for WASSUP to run a program to keep all 642 toilets, taps and drains in repair, it cost 1.3 million. So this often means we spend a lot of time trying to get politicians to listen. We don't always succeed at this one.
So this is a local level issue. It's not a national level issue. So you can only be dealing with Joburg Council, not Gauteng, and not national. Is that correct?
No, I don't think so. I mean, really, public space, whilst there's custodianship of province, I mean, Andries with his planning background might have an alternative perspective, but public space is the responsibility of all people. And whilst there are clear mandates between provincial, national and local government as to who's responsible for it, when it comes down to things like human rights and access to adequate sanitation and flushing the dirty sewage away so people don't get sick, that's a human rights issue. Not having access to water or having to walk hundreds of meters to access a water stand that may or may not be working or water may or may not be supplied to it becomes, for me, a human rights thing. So you're right, we should be targeting different spheres of government, but it's everybody's responsibility to make sure this works for people.
If I can come in as well, Jen, to say, I think even though we might be commissioned, for example, when we're working in parks at a local level, as you're saying, it does cut, whatever we work on does cut across all sectors of government. It's just that maybe we might have a mandate from one, sector of government. But for an example, with the issue in Diepsloot, it is not just the toilets. It's housing, and housing is not local government. That would be province and national. So it's like, there's the environment. So it does cut across different sectors. So I guess that's the complexity of the city and some of the work that we try to do, trying to find the balance between all the different parties that are either affected or that are involved that could play a role in addressing these issues.
So what is the role of, I mean, we can see civil society, the people who live there, Andries, Jenn, you guys are in there as civil society. How do you engage business? Because surely it's the responsibility of business who hopefully is employing many of the people who commute in every day with minibuses from Diepsloot to appear dressed up in their office best, to be a receptionist, a messenger, on some level, working in an office. They're expected to be on time. I remember when I was consulting in wellness, people were very upset when the receptionist arrived late. They don't have access to water. How do we engage big business to understand that it's as much their responsibility? I think COVID has changed things a bit, but how do we engage them? How do you go about engaging them?
Yeah, well, I think, I think we have different sizes of businesses, right? So, WASSUP has a supporter of Plumlink, proudly Bidvest, but they're not a big company. So, for them to survive after the COVID and the close down and the slowing down of the construction industry, the fact that they employ a lot of people and keep them employed and stop retrenchments is already quite a big thing. And they are continuing to support WASSUP in this process as well, in their work in Diepsloot. So, I mean, that's one side of business. And then I guess you've got and they're just like the people who are just working hard to keep things going and employ people. But then you've got the big business, I guess. I suppose that's the Porsche drivers and the Range Rover drivers. And I mean, one of my big beefs are, often these corporate social investment projects are so much money thrown at projects that are not necessarily sustainable or not at grassroots level, or, let's start up an entire new soccer league across Diepsloot. But hang on a second, there's already a couple of small families who are running a soccer league in Diepsloot. Why don't we build on what we've got? I don't know. We haven't been successful at attracting the larger companies. And in my experience of dealing with some of them on other projects is that often the requirements are quite limited, and it has to be funding, sometimes when there's big government funding from European funders, the funding has to be this amount, it has to be spent in this amount of time, and it has to be spent on 1, 2, and 3. But hang on, the people said they want 5, 6, and 7, and actually we need 21 and 22 as well. So I think big business needs to think more laterally about what they do and how they spend their corporate social investment. And I think they need to really spend more time making sure that the projects that they're focusing on are really having an effect and are bottom-up meets top-down type of process.
Let me not delay you. I've taken us way off topic, but why not?
Okay, sure. So WASSUP continue to expand and share their skills in other area. This is a tap repair program in Raby Ridge. Just before COVID, they went to Kaya Sands and repaired. This week, they donated some time and materials to, again, Vredendorp, a temporary transitional housing in Vredendorp. But these are all small, incrementable, scalable solutions. I go a bit crazy when I hear UN talk that says we need scalable solutions. Sure, we need scalable solutions, but the same cookie cutter solution on every city and every place is not going to work. Incremental ideas that can be repeated again and again and again, but adapted to local conditions. So for example, the Diepsloot team came out to Putytjaba House and said, hey, we can repair some taps. And we all thought that the toilets would be the next thing on the list, but they're not. It's the laundry facilities that need repairing. So it's about listening and making sure we're hearing what people are telling us.
Wow.
And we jump to Jeffystown. This is a fabulous project with the Trinity sessions, working towards safe public spaces. So it's not always about toilets. It's not always about public space development. Sometimes it's just about making spaces safe temporarily for families. In this particular project, we had volunteers with large lanterns on sticks to walk people home safely to their buildings in streets where there were no streetlights. Sometimes it's just about providing safe family entertainment outside and in public space. Someone in a car in the suburbs can drive to the movies and be safe, and there's security guards everywhere you go. But if you live in a building in Jeffystown, where do you take your child in the evening for family entertainment? Doing great artwork, making sure people are paid at reasonable rates, always, all the time. It's a constant principle that we work with.
Is the art respected by the communities?
Yeah, I'm just trying to, I was just thinking of something and it's gone out of my mind. There's something that we did recently where it's been really looked after. So Vrijdorp last week, there was a monument, a heritage monument installed there quite some time ago on 14th and Cross Street. A bulldozer was coming to clean up some rubbish and the bulldozer knocked the monument over. The construction team came in a few days ago to take the granite for safekeeping whilst they work out what else to do. The guys sleeping on the street stopped the construction company from taking it away because they thought they were stealing it, and we hadn't communicated properly. Whereas the construction team mistakenly thought that they were being attacked by the guys on the street. So yes, there is utter respect. The public art in Diepsloot, again, a collaboration that we did with Trinity Sessions, is all intact. So people do respect things, but we do have problems. We have drug problems in our city, and it's more than I think any of us have ever seen. We've never seen so many dirty needles on the street, and we've never seen so much nyope and tick and other drugs being used. So, you know, as we all know, when people use drugs like this, then they're not themselves. They become somebody else. So things will get stolen, and, you know, we can't install copper taps or brass taps in Diepsloot. They have to be plastic taps. But in principle, people absolutely respect their environment, and they respect as best as they possibly can in the circumstances. You know, especially if you're living on the street and you have to carry water a long way, or you don't have access to a tap or a toilet. You know, we also have to appreciate that people do what they can as best they can, and they have to have a priority list. And it may not be picking up the rubbish that was thrown on the sign, but it is making sure they've got food on the table for their child.
Absolutely. And forgive me, I might have meant celebrated as well, not necessarily respected about the art.
Okay. Wendy.
Yes, and a shame we've lost Andries again. I'm so sorry.
Oh no, I was waiting for him to jump in. Okay, let's try and reconnect. In the meantime, Windy Brow was an interesting project, which was a collaboration with the Market Theatre Foundation. And some years ago, you know, the Windy Brow fell into disrepair and closed. It was a very big heritage project where they renovated the building. But again, we started action research. We were commissioned to do market research on this project. But again, we begin by asking what is needed, not just what the neighbourhood needs, but also the relevant industry, because the Market Theatre Foundation, of course, is the arts. And we worked really hard to create programs that are wanted and needed, but we had to consider not just what the neighbourhood need, but also, and the program leader, but also the beneficiaries. So it's about trying to find that middle ground between, you know, the Windy Brow. I think the big challenge we found at Windy Brow was, how do you create a community arts centre? How do you be true to the arts and celebrate art and promote the arts and the economy around the arts, but also work with community and community needs?
And I think, again, really important just to contextualize for those who are globally watching us, Windy Brow is an old heritage building from the discovery of Johannesburg. It was upgraded and maintained probably 50 years ago and transformed into an art centre. So I'm assuming, Jen, it's also been through some construction again, because those floors look beautiful. You went in to do projects. You weren't doing infrastructural change.
No, we specifically went in to do market research, and followed by the research was the action. It was implementing and programming arts, community-based arts in some program. And here's an interesting story about that building. So it was, I can't remember the name of the family, but when he moved from Europe, apparently women were disappearing around one of the original benefactors of the house. And then when he moved to Johannesburg, women disappeared again around the house. And as they renovated, when they went room by room, they kept expecting to find bodies, but they never did. So maybe they were just stories in the end.
Oh, wonderful.
And the nurses that used to live at BG Alexander, which is now a Madlo Moho building, where a lot of people live, and there's some great social programs running in that building, where they used to train in the Windy Brow, and they used to give us the creepiest stories about things and lights that would come on and off and doors that would open and close in that building. So it was a really interesting building, and it's part of the fabric. And what you see just behind that in this picture here is Pulinjikop Park. And if anyone knows Johannesburg, Pulinjikop Park was quite notorious for being an extremely dangerous place in Hillbrow, with a lot of drug use and a lot of robberies. And almost everybody that lives in the area has a story about being robbed around Pulinjikop or attacked in some way. But I mean, this was because the Windy Brow was next door, we were able to extend our reach, and we collaborated again with Johannesburg City Parks and Zoo. And the park had been renovated, but there were so many drugs and violence and that type of activity happening on one side of the park could never be opened. The police weren't able to do anything about it. Multiple spheres of government really struggled to tackle this problem, because this is a challenge we have in all of our who came together and overcame that challenge, and they negotiated with the people on the street, and the park was open temporarily every day for women and children for several hours, and closed again afterwards, and then opened. And while the park was open, people were safe crossing into and from the park, and then it was closed again. So I mean, it's really interesting.
Sorry, Andries.
You have this heritage building and very colonial space, very park. Yay! Welcome back, Andries.
Yay! So we're in Hillbrow, Andries, and we've just discussed Windy Brow. But I'm sure you've got lots to contribute about this project, because Jenn said, what a pity we'd lost you at that point.
Yeah, I was just having network problems. If you have any questions you can ask, I'll be happy to answer. I'm pretty sure that Jenn gave you a pretty well picture that covers most of the stuff that we've done.
Well, Jenn, you know what Andries has done. He's been very modest. So perhaps you can prompt Andries on the Windy Brow projects and on other projects in the Hillbrow area.
Oh gosh! So one of the things I think Andries can maybe talk about is we're really lucky to have a series of different acupuncture and different types of projects or funding or commissions in that area all at once, and so we're often able to bring things together. So the Pulinjakop, the N Street North Park, the Windy Brow, and because we'd already worked with the community, it made it that existing neighbourhood. It made it a lot easier to be able to jump into a new idea and to bounce new ideas off people. Andries, I don't know if you have any comments about that.
I guess, yeah, that talks to I guess the type of engagement that we do. We sort of like have a prolonged type of engagement. We don't go in and then come out, because we are also part of the community, or we try to work with the people that we build with, work with existing organizations. Sort of like what Jenn is saying. I think even the initial idea of having to do activations at Pulinjakop had come from the residents that live up at Pulinjakop, who had been part of the engagement process of the N Street process. So I guess, yeah, that's sort of like how things intertwine, and we try to bring resources into the same spaces. Yeah.
And it's all about trust.
Definitely.
People have to trust us. And so for people to trust us, we have to tell the truth. And we have to be open, honest, transparent, and accountable for every single thing we do.
So again, my question here is this the routine way of operating? Has it always been the way to operate in urban planning, etc.? Has it always been this consultative, or is this a 21st century methodology or late 20th century methodology?
Andries?
Oh, we're losing him again.
No. Okay.
Let's keep going.
Okay. So I think things are changing. I think slowly governments, when we first started doing this work, people weren't, and city parks and JDA and GIZ had really gone out on a limb to try and change the way that communities were participated with. And it's not just about, big public meetings, but actually being more creative. It's interesting, the one thing that we've learned is that whilst you can be really creative about how you engage with communities, it's still important to tick the policy boxes. So if a public meeting, a formal public meeting with attendance registers is required, then that has to be done at the same time as the alternative consultation approaches. So it is changing. I do think governments are slowly, it's like shifting the Titanic. 1 inch at a time every 10 years, maybe we can shift. And slowly they're starting to change their approaches. And it's really encouraging to see. It's really encouraging to see more out-of-the-box thinking by municipalities and governments about how they do things. eThekwini has taken up the Park Activation Coordinator program, and apparently they're doing great things. So yes, it's changing, and it's nice to see it's changing.
But pedagogically, has there been a big shift globally to a much more inclusive way of working, or was that always in the discipline?
No, I mean, it was really in the 70s. Was it Robert Chambers? Was he the guy who people felt that he was sort of the instigator of the discussion around participatory and asset-based approaches? Okay. So, I mean, the thinking has been around for a long time, but in our experience, and this is where Sticky really specializes, it falls down in the implementation. The policies are there, the ideas are there, the desire is there. The actual ability to implement these ideas is where it often falls over. And this is where most of our projects come unstuck. So that's why we're specializing so much at what is that intersection between the red tape of the informality and the red tape of the formality.
Very interesting, a comment from our previous presenter. Makers Valley truly appreciate the partnership they have with you.
Oh,
and
yes.
I know he was very modest on what Makers Valley have achieved, but I'm going to shut myself up, because I'm sure you've got so much more to show us, and you haven't. Yes.
Oh, and I forgot to say that one of the big energy drivers of the makers is also the Colour Cube, who partnered with us on this Wendy Brow project. They bring extraordinary energy to the project, and especially around the arts industry. So I mean, it's these sort of partners and collaborators that a city needs, and these are the sort of organisations and initiatives that all of us should be pumping our resources into. If a big corporate wants to do a fabulous CSI project, contact the organisations who are already doing great stuff. George Cossey from George Cossey's boxing gym, just up on Nugget Street, up to the left of this photo. He does extraordinary work and rarely gets paid for it. These are the places we need to be pumping our resources into, because these are the people who are changing our cities for the better and who are considering things at a small-scale solution. Oh, yeah, you're back.
Hey, yeah, George Cossey's in Claim Street is not on Nugget Street.
Oh, sorry, Claim Street. You're right. He's on the
Claim
next
Street.
one over.
Yes.
Thank you.
That's right. And always, we need to have a lot of fun. Need to have fun in public space, and we need to celebrate life, because life is so tough for so many people. It's tough for everyone, and we never underestimate what people are going through, but it is really important to celebrate life as well, in everything that we do.
And I think that that's really a powerful near-ending statement, because the thing that I most appreciate about our country, and maybe, Jen, this is what's attracted you, because we didn't quite get into that one, is the amazing resilience, goodwill, this ability to innovate and keep just being positive and awesome in the most extraordinarily, as you've shown us, difficult circumstances. And I love that you're making this all fun and worthwhile and beautiful. Andries, how do you experience it? Because it's all well and good for me to say that there's this wonderful, innovative feeling in you living there. What's your lived reality?
Well, I guess, as Jenn has said, like Jenn has tried to put it, because we try and work with what people are doing. So if people are dancing, we try to try and work with, the dancing of the people, and try to move, with that, and try to, highlight that aspect of, their life, instead of trying to dwell, as Jenn is saying, there's so much problems, not just in the inner city. I guess, all over the country, there's so much unemployment. And I guess in the spaces that we work with or work at, in public spaces, there's a lot of homelessness, a lot of drug use. So there's a lot of challenges. So we can't just dwell on, the negatives. And I guess it's not even us to say that we don't want to dwell in the negatives. When you do try and deal with the people, or when you interact with the people on the ground, it's not all about the negativity. So if you bring the negativity, then I guess we can't move anywhere. There won't be any sort of like progress. And I guess the people aren't doing that. When you go out into the streets, when you talk to people, you can see that people are trying to sort of live even through the tough conditions that they experience.
But that, for me, is the beauty, for me, is that there's always a resilience and a humor and and the fact that what this organization is doing is harnessing the very best of Africa and making it meaningful, realistic, useful to the immediate citizens that you guys are serving, you must get a lot of you must be very, very grateful for the work you both are doing. I know it's frustrating at times. Just as a closer, Jenn and then Andries, what is your wish list moving forward? You've done so much. What's the next step, and what would be your wish list?
Andries, you go first. I need to think about my top.
Okay, I think for me, my wish list is what would be one thing. It comes from, I guess, the land experiences that we've picked up over the years, and that is, as Jenn I think tried to say, or she put it in a different way, in terms of like experiences or expertise, in terms of like having to acknowledge the fact that everyone brings to the table like valuable knowledge or resources. So to try, when we work with people, like I guess to be cognizant of the fact that everyone has something to bring to the table. So I guess my wish list would be I guess more partnerships. Whatever projects or whatever work that people are doing, it has to be sort of like in collaboration with other people. If you try and do something on your own, I guess in isolation it omits a lot of stuff, and I guess that's where the challenge is. So if there could be more collaborations, I guess, from the private sector with government, NGOs,
Right.
NGOs amongst themselves, different people, international, local, that I guess that's the start.
And money.
Well,
Yes.
for me, not even. I guess it's like whatever people are bringing, whatever resources, like Jenn said, I think they are available. Like some places, you don't need the money. Money is not the biggest priority that's needed. So I guess respond to what is the need in each and every specific instance that you encounter.
So I second that, and I want every toilet and tap in this city fixed. It's actually very achievable. That's my wish list.
And you have trained women plumbers and all sorts of plumbers, not just women.
Loads.
Sorry, what did you say? I missed you.
Loads of people trained. It's totally achievable to have every communal toilet and tap in this city fixed. It is absolutely doable. So I second Andries' motion, and I add one.
Thank you. The two of you have been absolutely awesome and huge insights, and I'm so delighted you agreed to join us today. I think we might have a partnership on the way. Oh, I think I've been cut.
No, I'm here.
Are you there?
I think we've been cut from the main.
Yes, and I wanted to say I was about to build into, I think we've got a partnership. So Jenn, watch us.
Oh no, we're still live, says Jade.
Still live, they're telling us, right?
Okay.
So I think we might have a partnership on the way. It will be coming in at about 3:30 today, I hope. No promises, but I'm certainly hoping that those wishes are met.